proud descendant of a lineage of South Asian student activists. Welcome to tonight's keynote, the first event of the 16th Annual Ray Warren Symposium on Race and Ethnic Studies. Our theme, Beyond Resistance, Race and Revolutionary Struggle, is a 3-day exploration of the ways in which people of color reclaim power through their art, activism, healing, and generations of cultural knowledge. We are honored that you have joined us tonight to learn from revolutionaries who work tirelessly so that communities can heal from exploitation and gain freedom from oppressive social systems.
Hi everyone, my name is Eva Magaña. I'm a senior rhetoric and media studies major with a minor in theater. I'm also a co-chair for this year's symposium. We are thrilled to present to you our kickoff keynote presentation titled, It's Our Future, Reimagining Environmental Justice. Before this well-anticipated event begins, we have a few housekeeping items to share with you. Be sure to follow our social media handles listed in the program.
We encourage you to live tweet during the presentation using our hashtag RWSympLC, but please take out your phones now to make sure that your devices are silent. We are recording tonight's presentation and will post the video to the symposium website in the coming weeks. Other recordings of the talk are not authorized. Additionally, please be sure to visit the incredible art show upstairs in STEM tomorrow and on Friday, preferably when panels are not in session. More information on all the events can be found in your program or on our website.
As some of you may know, we are offering a healing justice practice space tomorrow and Friday as part of the symposium. This is a place for community healing that centers around Black, Indigenous people of color, people with disabilities, and queer and trans folk. We are offering a variety of healing modalities and centering practitioners of color in an effort to uplift the resilience of the community. These services are free and geared towards POC participants in the symposium. Please sign up at the table outside Thayer for massages and emotional support. All other spaces are drop-in. There will be time for questions and discussion after the presentation. Please raise your hand and wait for someone to come with you with the microphone. Even if you think your voice is loud enough, please still wait for the microphone so we can have the recording loud enough for everyone and also for the recording itself.
Before Feliquan Charlemagne had learned how to walk, he had to leave his birthplace, St. Thomas, on the US Virgin Islands, because its climate made his family's survival economically unviable. In the last 3 years alone, JP Morgan Chase has financed fossil fuel companies to the tune of $195 billion. Now, living in Ocala, Florida, Feliquan is no stranger to hurricanes and rising sea levels caused by monstrous CO2 emissions. Feliquan has been the National Creative Director of US Youth Climate Strike and was currently taken on as the National Executive Director for the organization. The stunning website, visuals, and graphic design that many of you have seen from the organization is what Feliquan does. I'm so in awe of your power, your eloquent understanding of the climate crisis, and your thoughtful delivery of what we need to do to move forward. This summer, my city saw firsthand the impacts of a flash flood. Bridges collapsed, low-income and working-class communities that built their houses by the riverside had nothing left. And while capitalist elites can remain comfortable and treat the ongoing planetary and ecological climate crisis as either a distant reality or a money-making opportunity, some of us have a lot more skin on the line. And so the majority of us cannot afford to remain indifferent or apathetic anymore. Our speakers tonight are powerful, strong advocates for far-reaching legislative action that tackles socioeconomic and racial inequalities that are at the very heart of this climate crisis.
Hong Kong, Marshall Islands, Bangladesh, Italy, Chile. Youth are at the forefront of protest all over the world, including the belly of the neoliberal capitalist empire, aka the United States of America. What makes the work that US youth climate strike leaders do invaluable is their understanding of organizing as a constant engagement. They're always thinking and learning, mobilizing, and supporting their communities and peers. Kamiya Mahajan is a US youth climate strike leader from Seattle, Washington. Her grassroots activism exemplifies a commitment to radical justice and collective organizing that is necessary to fight this climate justice battle. She's a strong advocate for the voices of young people. She says, the fact that adults at our city, state, national, and international levels are expecting teens to find solutions to the climate crisis is not cute or empowering. It is a gross injustice to ask 13, 14, 15-year-olds to spend their time figuring out how to save all of humanity because adults are too selfish to act. As Kamiya says, climate justice is not just about the climate.
Youth strikes in the US and all over the world won't stop until the representatives that were elected to serve people actually do, and do that by taking bold action to put an end to the climate crisis. When Feliquan and Kimaya command that our population pay attention, they're not only setting an important moral precedent, they're leading a revolution. Please join us in welcoming tonight's keynote speakers, the electric Feliquan Charlemagne and Kimaya Mahajan.
I'll just go first.
I'm going first, right?
You go first? Okay. Hello, everyone. Obviously, my name is Feliquan Charlemagne. I first want to thank you for that wonderful introduction. I don't even know where you went. Oh, yeah, right here. For that wonderful introduction. My name is Feliquan Charlemagne. Like they said, I was born in St. Thomas of the U.S. Virgin Islands, which is seeing the very real effects of the climate crisis for my entire life, and especially right now. At 2 months old, I was forced to move from the island which I lived into Ocala, Florida, and Florida is just next in line to see the worst of the climate crisis. We're already seeing these hurricanes, from Hurricane Irma to Hurricane Dorian, which has devastated the Bahamas, and see climate migrants and refugees, millions, just like me, and just like people like my family, all over the world. I first got into activism when I saw the March for Our Lives movement. I think that it was just incredibly empowering, and honestly, just completely life-changing to see young people like me who couldn't even vote to stand up for what they believed in. That's the first time where I truly started to even begin to understand what collective power was and what collective power really meant. And that's when I first got into activism. I started a chapter in my own city. I launched a huge voting rights initiative with my friends, which was incredibly successful. And it's only been up from here. We're moving into building an entire revolution across the globe, quite literally, for climate justice, and that's what I'm here to speak to you guys about today.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kimaya, and my story relating to climate justice is a little different from Feli's, but I too have a personal stake in the issue. I have families in California, and as you guys know, the forest fires that we've seen down there have just been completely debilitating to the entire region of Southern California, and I've seen as my family's homes and communities and places that used to be such an instrumental part of their childhood have just been destroyed by these fires, and they've been forced to leave and come up to Oregon and to Washington because it's just no longer a place where they feel safe raising a family. I have family in India, in New Delhi, which is one of the most polluted cities in the world. And you guys might have seen the recent headlines about toxic foam that's literally in their rivers right now as a result of the horrible pollution that is not only because of the pollutants in New Delhi, but also because of the incredible industrial waste that this country dumps into previously colonized countries all around the world, including Bangladesh, India, and all of these underdeveloped countries that are just trying to grow themselves without the United States dumping all of its problems onto them as well. And so I've seen my family being affected by the climate crisis, and even though where I live in Seattle, Washington, I have been fortunate enough to not have to live with these consequences every day. Seeing other communities have to live with that is what motivated me to get involved in the climate action movement, because I realized that climate action was not something that was happening in 10 or 20 years, which is what a lot of activists, white activists in particular, like to paint the movement as, but it's something that is affecting communities of color and marginalized communities in this country and around the world every single day, whether we see it or not.
Yeah, and so I just wanted to start with like a kind of overview of the issue scientifically. I think we all kind of understand climate change is the cause of carbon emissions and other greenhouse gases. Pretty much the greenhouse gas effect causes heat to be trapped into the earth by these greenhouse gases that are being released into our atmosphere. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, reports that if we do not reduce our emissions 45% globally by 2030, we're going to be locked into the worst effects of climate change. And so how has this happened? How did we get here? We see that all over the world, the fossil fuel industry has bought out governments. These corporations have lobbied millions and millions of dollars into making sure that climate denialism is into our governments. This is especially true in the US, where the fossil fuel industry has lobbied over $300 million to our politicians, essentially saying that their votes matter more than our votes, the votes of everyone inside of this room. And that's what's really led to these key issues. And climate change is an issue that's not just, a kind of scientific issue. It's the intersection of almost every single issue in our existence, and it's quite literally the existential threat is what they call it. And so there's so many examples of this. We talk about how indigenous communities are the most affected and how there's climate migration, how immigration is at the intersection of climate change. We talk about even the pollution. We look at historically black and brown communities were purposely placed to the east of major polluters so that they would see the most of the pollution. And today, black and brown communities are breathing in far more pollution than white communities, despite creating far less of that pollution, causing higher rates of diseases like cancer, of breathing issues and whatnot. And so this is, again, a very real issue that we're already facing today, not some kind of abstract problem that's going to come in the future. Do you want to talk some more about it?
Yeah, so to continue off of those amazing points, environmental racism is a very real thing. As Feli described, historically, black and brown communities have been placed in locations where the effects of pollution will hit them the hardest. We see the same with indigenous communities being placed in coastal areas where the effects of floods will not only hurt their communities physically, but also their economies that rely predominantly on fishing and things that are because of the water in the riverbeds near them. We also see homeless populations being affected by the climate crisis. I'm sure we all remember in February the polar freeze that hit especially this northwestern region of the United States, where temperatures were just dropping to below freezing in a matter of weeks. And our most vulnerable populations, including the homeless population, felt the effect of this when they didn't have access to a roof over their head or any form of protection from the natural elements. And so where I live in Seattle, dozens of homeless people died as a result of extreme frostbite and were hospitalized for reasons like this as well. And so I think this is just really shows how we forget as we live in our nice warm beds with roofs over our head, we forget that these crises are affecting marginalized populations that don't get the media attention and they don't get the same voice at a national scale, and that allows their tragedies to go unheard when it comes to climate justice.
The Green New Deal was pushed to the forefront of the national conversation exactly a year ago today when the group called the Sunrise Movement occupied Nancy Pelosi's office, pretty much demanding that Democrats stand up for the Green New Deal and for this climate policy. Pretty much what the Green New Deal is, it's a framework of different goals that include at the forefront getting to net zero emissions by 2030 so that the globe can reach that 45% emission set, 45% emissions reduction set by the IPCC governmental panel. Pretty much the Green New Deal, it's not just a question about climate policy, it's a question of our entire political alignment. It draws back from FDR's New Deal and pretty much says, who is the government going to work for? Are we going to continue to work for the people on the top? Are we going to continue to work for these big polluters, for these giant corporations? Or are we going to start caring about the little guy, the guy who's breathing in this pollution, the guy who's being displaced by climate change, the people who are really going to be affected by this? And so because of this, the Green New Deal is not just good policy. The Green New Deal is also good politics. After FDR's New Deal, House Democrats saw about 40 years of support. FDR had 4 terms and would have had more terms if possible. the Green New Deal is the best way for us to move forward in addressing this crisis and in winning in 2020.
Yeah, and so in the aftermath of the Green New Deal, we saw a rise in lots of environmental movements. Sunrise is a great example, but also was the creation of U.S. Youth Climate Strike, which is the organization that we're both a part of. And our organization got started as March 15th, which was the first big climate strike in the United States, started picking up momentum within this country. And we saw across the world individual youth striking in their home city. We saw this with Greta Thunberg in Sweden. We saw this with Alexandra Villaseñor in New York. We saw this with a friend of mine, Ian, who lives in Seattle. And they had been striking way before March 15th ever became a day that we all know as the climate strike. But our organization started as grassroots activists like the three youth that I just named, who decided that they needed to not make this a movement that only they participated in, but something that was going to be in all of the communities all over this country. And that's what grassroots activism is. It's individual people deciding that they can make a change within their community. It's not just the national organizing that makes headlines. It's not just the famous activists, but it's people like me who organize in my community in Seattle, Washington, and they make change happen within their community. And our organization has always emphasized that grassroots organizing is how things get done. It's not just two people calling the shots from Washington, D.C. It's about hundreds of people all over the country making change, what might seem like small change, but it all comes back to part of a bigger movement. And March 15th is when we first really saw this grassroots organizing with climate activism, led 100% by youth, take form into an amazing movement that started at 200,000 people on March 15th and has spread into millions of people striking across the globe in our latest strike on September 20th.
Yeah, so like she said, March 15 just started out as grassroots activists all over the country kind of banding together and saying that we needed to do something about this issue. Before that, there was no organization, there was no U.S. Youth Climate Strike, but after that, we noticed we had this incredible power to keep this momentum going and to truly build something and to win a Green New Deal all the way across the ballot, up and down the ballot in 2020. And so our first move as an organization was to start organizing for what we called the climate debate. The idea around the climate debate was that for so long, you know, this literally the greatest issue of our time is up here, and the politicians aren't even talking about it. When they do talk about it, it's in little talking points, little bits, oh, I believe in science, blah, blah, blah. But that doesn't actually do anything for the communities on the ground. That doesn't actually make any real change. And so we said, how about we have a debate on the issues? Who has the best plan? Go into depth. What are you going to do about this? What are you going to do about environmental racism? The issues that aren't talked about. Get down to the nitty-gritty, not just little, you know, little itty-bitty changes like plastic straw bans and stuff like that. We wanted bold, complete systematic change, and we needed the politicians to actually talk about how they were going to get that done. And so on April 5th, we launched our demands for the climate debate. We used our organizing power, both digitally and on the ground, to pretty much get almost every single one of the Democratic candidates to commit to supporting a climate debate, and we organized against the DNC as well to get Tom Perez and the DNC to organize a climate debate. And eventually, Tom Perez actually said no, he was not going to hold a climate debate. This was a decision that he made on his own without any consultation to the rest of the entire DNC. And so we started organizing harder. Sunrise had a 3-day sit-in in front of the DNC, and eventually they decided that they were going to hold a vote on the climate debate. And again, they did vote no. And so I think this is a testament to the fact that, you know, sometimes our organizing efforts may not seem like they're completely successful, and they may not seem like the best thing happened, the best outcome that happened was chosen, but at the end of the day, we did so much with that organizing power. We quite literally had tons of town halls on TV. CNN is a huge example, where 7 hours straight of time was dedicated to the climate crisis. Quite literally in TVs all over America, all over the US, was just the big words climate crisis, which is such a big change from the last election, where we only had about 5 minutes and 10 seconds dedicated to climate change and dedicated to the climate crisis and these policies during the Democratic debates. And so even though we didn't get the big headline goal, the climate debate, we had so much more conversation, and we've quite literally changed the 2020 election and how we talk about climate change because of that organizing.
And to his point, although we didn't see success with the climate debate in terms of it actually taking place, we saw success in lots of other ways. Where I live in Seattle, where we recently had our city council elections, 3 out of 7 of those candidates have proposed a plan to show how they're going to win the Seattle Green New Deal. And before the elections, all 9 of our Seattle City Council candidates had signed on a letter of support for the Seattle Green New Deal. And so we're seeing that the demands that we made from this climate debate might not have happened at a national level, but it's changed the conversation. And now for a candidate to be elected in my city, the bare minimum is them to agree to the Seattle Green New Deal. And that really just shows how we've shifted the mindset in our communities. And now climate change is not just one of the many issues alongside, housing and transportation and gun violence prevention, but it is the core issue that people are starting to realize intersects into all these other issues, which brings us to, as we continue down throughout this year of amazing climate momentum, we got to our September 20th strikes, which, as you guys know, was the largest mobilization for climate action in global history. I think that's pretty amazing that, a bunch of random youth organized the greatest mobilization in world history, where we got 4 million people out on the streets all around the world. And this September 20th date was really important, not just because of its focus on climate action, but specifically its focus on climate justice, which is the intersection of climate action with all these other issues that we talked about, including racial justice, indigenous justice, class-based justice, justice for homeless people, justice for other marginalized communities, including communities around the world, not just here in the United States. And the main focus of the September 20th strike was to show solidarity with the Black and brown and marginalized communities that have been facing and fighting for climate justice way before Greta Thunberg was even born. Even though she might be the headliner of this movement, Indigenous folks have been fighting in my community and in communities here in Portland, Oregon, and communities all around the country for decades before this movement got national attention like it is now.
Yeah, and one of the most important points that she talked about, one of the most important themes throughout this entire movement and every movement in history is the idea of solidarity. And I think that's one of the reasons that the September 20th strike was so powerful, because it wasn't just youth walking out and just youth striking, and it wasn't just one, demographic walking out, one demographic striking. That protest, that march, that strike was led by Black and brown Indigenous youth, and it was followed by and it was supported by workers all over the world. Google and Amazon, those workers, thousands of them walked out and supported us, and people from quite literally almost every single country in the world supported us, and that solidarity is this type of solidarity we need to win. It's not just my issue, it's not just her issue, this is all of our issues, and that's how we're gonna make this movement work.
And going back to thinking about how both of us first got involved in climate organizing related to this point, when I was first realizing my passion in social justice, I always saw myself aimed as focusing on the issues that I saw impacting my communities, like immigration reform and gun violence prevention and women's rights and our criminal justice reform system, all the issues that I saw impacting communities I was a part of. And to be honest, for a long time, I didn't see how climate change was impacting my community. I saw it as something that hippies did when they were hugging trees and swimming with dolphins. I saw it as one demographic fighting for that issue, and I didn't see how people that looked like me and people that had the same struggles as me fit into this movement. But as I learned more and more about what environmental justice means, I realized that climate change is the grand culmination of every single issue that our world has ever faced. And when we think about historically systems of oppression that have caused a lot of the problems that we see today, such as capitalism, the idea that everything, including Mother Earth itself, can be bought and sold, that has fed into the climate crisis. Colonialism, the idea that we can go onto native sacred land and pillage for resources for our own greed, that has contributed to the climate crisis. And at the end of the day, even systems like patriarchy and the criminal justice system, the institutionalized prison system, and LGBTQ rights and discrimination against Indigenous people, discrimination against women and people of color, all of these different issues that our country and our world has seen all come back to greed, capitalism, colonialism, and all of these things together have resulted in the climate crisis, which is why you don't have to look like him, you don't have to look like me, you don't have to look like a tree hugger to want to be involved with climate justice, because at the end of the day, it is the grand culmination of every single issue that has ever been worth fighting for.
And so what are our next steps? March 15th is over, September 20th is over. I think that the biggest question, the biggest struggle of the climate movement is how are we going to make everyday regular people care about this issue? How are we going to make everyone know that this is their struggle? How are we going to unite struggles that aren't necessarily directly climate focused? People who are living every single day, how are they going to understand that this is about an essential question, which is who is this government going to work for? Who are global governments going to work for? I think it's the essential question of the climate movement. And I think that once we learn how to make everyday people care about this issue, and we unite them all together in a truly grassroots movement all over the world, that's when we're going to win. Thank you. And we're now going to open the floor to any questions.
Any questions? Hands? Yes. Okay. I cannot go up these stairs. Wait, who's... Yeah, I'm just gonna sit here.
Could you guys talk about some ways for us sitting in the audience and people to support your organization and your movement, specific things we can do?
I think one of the biggest ways that you can support us is raising awareness. And I mean, we're going through a huge organizational restructuring where we're bringing in tons of new organizers, and anyone can literally get involved no matter what your age is, no matter what you do, no matter what your passions are or what your talents are. So I think a big way to get involved is to start organizing with us. But on top of that, you can raise awareness for the things we're doing for our next strikes. The next strike is going to be November 29th and December 6th. These actions are going to be a little bit different than the past actions. They're going to be more direct action-y. And so if you go to strikewithus.org, you can find out where your action is going to be, and you can come out and come to the action, and you can, raise awareness and get your friends to come out as well.
So in terms of the criminal justice system, which you mentioned, if I was, which I am, involved in a lot of nonprofits that work in that field, like prison abolition, racial justice, things of that nature, how would we go about incorporating more aspects of environmental justice into our work? Or what groups do you suggest that we should partner with in that endeavor?
Mm-hmm. Well, do you want to speak on this? Or? Oh, yeah.
Well, I think the biggest thing that comes to mind is the use of inmates' labor to be fighting the Californian wildfires. And I think that just how we talk about the 13th Amendment being modern day slavery, I think that's another great parallel, is the use of that labor. And I think that there is not enough being done at the intersection of environmental justice and prison abolition or prison reform, because I think it's not something that people think about initially. But we see that it's the same communities that are being marginalized, that are being disproportionately impacted on both ends of that spectrum. And there is an intersection where both of these issues are causing great destabilization to these communities. And it's important that we address that and understand how fighting for one is fighting for both. And so I wish I could give you the names of organizations that are doing work around this, but I think that that's a place that if that's what someone is truly passionate about, there's a lot of room to grow and to fight for that particular intersection. So I think that that's a really important thing that more people should be talking about.
Yeah, and beyond the 13th Amendment, there's just so many intersections. I think about prison conditions in general. I think that it was in New York where all of the heating systems completely shut off and people were left in the cold for so long. And it took hundreds and hundreds of protesters coming out for them to finally be able to fix that situation. It's about how much do we value human beings as human beings, which is just one of the many essential questions of movements in general. And we talk about also, I think it was during Hurricane Katrina, where hundreds and hundreds of prisoners were literally just left out to die as the hurricane destroyed that land. And so we look at issues like that, and that's just some of the many ways where climate justice intersects with racial justice and with the criminal justice system.
Hey, my question is, do you go to school? And if so, do you have an arrangement with your school that allows you to travel and do activism when you need to?
So I actually don't. I actually do online school now, which is like flexible and it's like good for activism and organizing and whatnot. So yeah, I mean, do you want to speak on your?
Yeah, it's an ongoing struggle and it's a learning process. I'm sure like here in Portland too, there's like school districts have a requirement of how many days you have to be at school in order to like graduate that class and like be able to go on to the next school year. And so like I'm a sophomore right now in high school, so my freshman year, that was like a huge, like I had missed so many days that there's this bill at our school where you can get like sent to court, you know, if you don't show up to enough days of school. And so my counselor called me down and she's like, that's gonna happen to you if you don't start showing up to school. And so luckily I was able to like pass my freshman year because she waived over half of my absences. And so I think I only ended up having like 17. It was pretty good. It came down from like 35, so, you know. But I think that it's a problem with our school system that we are so focused on academics and like physically being in school that it's so hard to focus on the things that I'm actually learning from, like being able to come here and, you know, have opportunities like this and being able to organize and to lead these movements. I feel like that's where I'm getting my most education from, and so definitely, if any of you guys that are, you know, older than me and have had experience with how to work with the school system to make sure that you can both organize and, you know, graduate with the rest of your class, I would love to hear that advice.
Hi, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about what you do within the organization and maybe like a highlight that something that you've been a part of and more of like what a day-to-day looks like.
Yeah. I mean, so you guys see me up here as this big title, like executive director. I've been executive director for like a whole 2 or 3 days now, so I can't really, speak much on executive directorship. So I actually started out as Florida State lead, right? I was Florida State lead for a good couple months, a month or two. Yeah, I started out Florida State lead. I organized 8 strikes in Florida, which was such an incredible experience. So, I mean, as state lead, pretty much what we do is we oversee like the organizing of strikes in our state. We make sure that every single community is having a strike. We're making sure these strikes are like resourced, and we're pretty much just meant to empower grassroots organizers on the ground level with national resources. I mean, that's what I did as Florida State lead. I then became creative director. So like I designed the branding identity of our organization. I do like a lot with like design, with like videography, all that good stuff. So as creative director, that was me. I was like the organization's nerd that like we went to for like graphic stuff. And so as executive directorship, I mean, like I am now working on a huge organizational restructuring so we can be like truly grassroots, so we can bring people in no matter where you are or where you come from. You should be able to just start organizing immediately. So that's a lot of the work that I've been doing and bringing in new organizers. So we're bringing in like an entire new team of national directors, which is going to be super fun, looking at apps for like hours and hours. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of like brief overview of what I do.
Yeah, and so for me, I'm right now the Washington State lead, but I started off as a Seattle organizer. And I honestly, like, I loved local organizing. Like, you just get to do it with your friends and you get to, you know, brainstorm stuff. But I'd say being the Washington State lead has been like an intense experience. It's amazing, but it's a lot of work. Like an average like day in the life for me is I get up in the morning, probably like I'm doing some kind of like making like a to-do list for my day. Then I go to school, and like throughout the school day, I'm also working on like whether that's like permits or emailing organizations or doing outreach to organizations or scheduling calls for later in the evening. And then after I get home from school, it's pretty much when I get home at like 4 all the way up until, I don't know, like 12, I'm doing like half homework, half I'm on calls with people, I'm scheduling things, I'm getting appointments with local politicians, or I'm, you know, talking to the permits office, or I'm talking to, you know, some big financial donor that can give us money for our next strike. Like it's pretty much a 24/7 process of doing activism while being a regular person, I guess.
Yeah, like as she obviously just put out there, like it's a lot of work to do this stuff. And I think that this like kind of huge narrative that's like, honestly, it's almost a disgusting narrative that's out there, like, oh, look at these youth doing this amazing work, like, oh my God, it's so empowering and whatnot. Like, it's not empowering. Like, what kind of world do we live in where, you know, youth have to take to the streets in thousands just to have a future to live in? Like, that's honestly a disgusting world, and it's not right that, you know, young people, 17 years old and 15 years old, who should be focusing on high school and college and all that other good stuff, should have to be doing the type of work like this. It's not right at all.
Hello. I'm curious about your thoughts and the organization's thoughts at large about balancing the growing trend in calling for individual actions, such as the zero waste movement and, as you mentioned, the plastic straw bans, with the larger goal of legislative change as well as global change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I don't think there's any problem with advocating for people to have individual change. If they have the privilege and the access to do that, go ahead, all for you. But I do not think that should be the focus of the movement as a whole. And I don't think that we're going to win if we do that, either in terms of, I guess you say strategically, you know, getting people to want to join the movement. That's not going to work. But also just logistically, there's no way that enough people are going to make enough individual actions that we're going to stop this crisis. It's just impossible. What we need is broad systematic change. And so there's so many statistics that you can look at that show that the only way that we're going to actually get to net zero emissions and actually restructure, you know, how the world works is with complete structural change. We look at the fact that 70% of these emissions are coming from just 100 companies. 71% of these emissions are coming from just 3 industries. 70% of the emissions are coming from gigantic big cities. All of these show that it's not a problem that individuals are doing. We look at even the distribution of like wealth. Like the richer you are, you have a much, much higher stake in the carbon emissions. So if we're going to go around and tell poor people like, oh, this is your fault, go pick up trash and whatnot, not only they're not going to want to join the movement, it's not actually going to do anything.
Who have you found to be your best partners so far, reaching out to state government individuals, national government, businesses, other nonprofit organizations?
So I would say that in my experience, our government has not been 100% supportive, especially at the state level. So Washington, Jay Inslee is our governor, and we all saw him on, you know, the presidential campaign trails painting himself to be like the climate hero that our country needs. And if any of you are familiar with Washington politics, you know that Jay Inslee is far from a climate hero. It was just such a lie that everyone in Washington, he had such little support in my circles, because if he was lying about this, you know, instrumental part of his identity at the national level, what else was he going to lie about? Because Jay Inslee is not a climate hero by any means. And so our state government has not been very particularly receptive. And when he tried to come to our strike on September 20th, he was there solely for photo ops. He did not respond to he did not respond to the list of demands that we gave him and his team beforehand. He just didn't even respond to the email, and he just showed up and took pictures with everyone that he could. So that was a disappointment. Our Seattle City Council and other city councils across Washington State have been a lot more receptive, because I think they're starting to realize that the youth that are leading this movement are going to be able to vote in literally at the next 3 to 4 years. And if they don't win our support now, then they're going to be voted out, and that's the reality of the thing. But I would say that our overwhelming support has come from small businesses and some big businesses like Ben & Jerry's, Patagonia, Lush. They've all been extremely supportive and have not attempted to hide their support for us. And so I know that large-scale support is extremely, beneficial to youth organizers that can feel like no one is on their side. And we've had small businesses that are on our side, and we do our best to support them. Because we know that they're supporting us. But I would say that while these individuals and smaller scale things, we have their support, we definitely do not have the support of our large scale government.
Yeah, and just speaking on like the lines of politicians and co-opting, I think it's a serious question for the climate movement going forward, is how we're going to stop our organizing and our strikes and whatnot from becoming this whole photo-opty, co-opty, like, you know, performative activism type thing. And I like a huge example of this as well. In Honolulu, our Hawaii organizers were telling us about how in Honolulu, the mayor came up and they're like, hey, can we speak at your strike? Like, oh, give me the mic, let me speak at the strike. And they're like, okay, well, you can speak if you commit to net zero emissions by 2030, and the mayor just walked off and left immediately. So it's just like, you know, all these politicians, they want the energy of the movement, they want the votes of the movement, but they don't want to do what the movement actually wants. They don't want the actual policies. And so this whole, they call it greenwashing. That's something that we have to really learn how we're going to combat.
I have a question. I know a lot of people do, and I promise we will get to you. I think something that I admire so much about your organizing that I don't see in the establishment that's made up of older people is your honesty and how you are not afraid to speak truth to power. And I know that back home when activists organize, especially against regimes, they're often scared for their lives because the stakes of this kind of organizing are really, really high. And so I want to know, and this is perhaps asking you to like delve a little bit deeper and get a little personal, if you've ever had an experience that's kind of jolted you, or if you've ever had to, you know, apart from feeling scared for your communities on the daily about because of how the crisis is impacting you, if you've how you kind of deal with that, the high stakes of this organizing.
I guess for me, I think part of the reason that I don't get too scared and don't get too caught up in the consequences is that I've already experienced the consequences of what happens if we don't win. You know, I've already experienced the climate migration, and my family has already experienced it. My grandma literally just had to move from her own home for almost a year after Hurricane Irma and stay with people in South Florida who were experiencing the same thing that she's experiencing now. My family and people like me all over the world already know what's going to happen if we don't win. And so I guess I don't really have the privilege of worrying about, you know, like what's going to happen now because I've already experienced the losing side and I don't want anyone else to be able to experience that. And I guess that's a huge reason why I'm in this fight.
I think, like, I agree that the possibility of, or not the possibility, but the reality of what will happen outweighs a lot of my concerns about right now. But I think that there is still a lot of danger that comes with being a public activist for these kinds of things. And so a friend of mine in Seattle, we were striking outside of Seattle City Hall, as we do pretty much every Friday that we can. And there was someone who gave her a bottle and told her that it was spray chalk. And we use chalk all the time. You know, we're allowed to because it's washable, and we just do it up and down the sidewalks of Seattle City Hall. And so he told her that it was spray chalk and that you were legally allowed to spray it on like the side of the wall of City Hall because it was public property. And she's 13. At the time I was 14, and we could have probably done more research, but we assumed that it was okay. So she used the spray chalk, and it turned out that it was spray paint, and she had spray painted the side of City Hall, which is, you know, a crime. And so the security guards said that they wouldn't call the police. They said that as long as she washed it off, it would be fine. So she was in the process of washing it off when 3 police cars and 5 bicycles came with their sirens blaring and arrested her as she was sobbing in handcuffs and took her to our like the holding cell, and she was in the holding cell for a little under an hour in handcuffs until her parents came and got her. And while there was a lot of controversy about this, because on one hand, yes, she did commit a crime, you know, it just shows that climate activists are, especially because it's a youth demographic primarily that's striking, it can be incredibly dangerous for youth to be out here in these very public movements that are not always met with respect and support, especially from like the police department and other like institutions like that. So that was definitely a very scary experience for a lot of the youth that were out there. But the next week we just came back even harder, and we brought normal sidewalk chalk this time, and we still did our chalk all over. And so while it was scary and it was definitely an eye-opening experience, I think it just taught us to be more, we had a training about like how to deal with police and like what you should do, how to talk to them respectfully but assertively. And so we learned a lot from that experience, but I think it just goes to your point that it is, there are risks to be a youth climate activist, for sure.
Hi, I also wanted to ask a personal question. I'm from Houston, Texas, so we've also been very affected by hurricanes and just flooding even this fall. That was another tropical storm that didn't really get attention. But how do you deal with the emotional trauma that, as an activist, I feel that you always have to kind of talk about it, and especially whenever in the beginning in your introductions, how they kind of talked about why you migrated or how you were involved in this. How do you deal with that personally, just because I feel like that's equally as important?
Yeah, I guess a lot of it is also community and understanding, I have family and I have other people who understand what I've been through. I don't know that I necessarily get to claim the trauma myself as much as a lot of people around me get to claim, because I was 2 months old. I didn't really understand what was going on. I didn't really have I didn't have emotional connection to the island or anything, so I don't know if I necessarily get to claim that trauma as much, but I think that I do see it a lot in my parents, immigration and everything. It's a big deal, and it's a big deal being in a new place. For my mother, she was a citizen because the area is a territory, but my dad was not a citizen. So I guess being in solidarity with other people like himself as well, and other people who are immigrants, and other people who have gone through what he's gone through, I think that does help him a lot and helps people like my family a lot.
Hi. Could you share a little bit to what being young and an organizer means to you, or feels like, I guess, on a more personal level, I guess?
Yeah. So I think that it's kind of incredibly, it's an incredibly strange concept, because here we are, people who don't have the right to vote. We really don't have any kind of place inside of the traditional systems right now that are meant to make change. And we've built systems on our own. We've literally built entire systems, entire organizations, entire organizing apparatuses that are almost in some ways more powerful than a lot of these different institutions and voting and other things like that. So I think that it is something it is an incredible journey. It is stressful. It is hard, but I think that, I think in the long run, it is going to be for the better of our generation.
Yeah, and I went through what a day in the life kind of looks like very vaguely, but it's definitely, it's weird, because when I first got involved in organized activism, I think I became a more polarizing person to be around, because my political beliefs were not just my political beliefs, but they were my morals and my values and the things that made me who I am. And so if one of my friends disagreed with me about politics, to me it was not a political disagreement, it was a moral disagreement. And so I couldn't see myself being, their best friend if they truly believed that people that looked like me didn't deserve as many rights as someone that looked like them, for example. And so as I got more involved in organized activism as a youth, I think I lost the respect of some people, and I think I gained the respect of others. And I learned more about who I am, and I had to be a lot more confident in my own identity in order to make it clear that I was not going to compromise who I was in order to please some people, including pleasing people who I wanted the respect of, like my friends, my teachers, parents of my friends, just all these different communities that I now realize I didn't want to be a part of. I had to make it clear that I was not going to pretend that I still was. This is probably the most personal I'm going to get, because it was a really hard growing experience for me to come to terms with who I was as an activist and as a person. And there's definitely a lot of things that I like regret, and there's a lot of friends that I've lost and a lot of decisions I had to make, but at the end of the day, I feel fulfilled in knowing that my identity is, I have a lot of integrity with my identity, and that is what keeps me motivated.
Thank you for doing what you're doing and for sharing all that you're sharing tonight. My question goes back to when you make calls to talk to politicians or other potential partners in growing the movement. What do you tell them? How do you manage to talk to them? And how do the things that you tell them vary depending on who you're talking to?
I think like the number one rule that I've like learned and that people have taught me over the years is like you can't phrase it as a question. You have to phrase it as a statement and like they get to decide how they respond to that, which is like very vague, but I think it works in a lot of situations because like when I was on the phone with someone from Jay Inslee's team, I didn't say like, have you seen our list of demands? I said, we sent you a list of demands and we won't have Jay Inslee speak at our strike unless you officially agree to them and you give us permission to share that he's agreed to them. And then he said, okay, like we'll check our email, blah, blah, blah. And so it didn't matter that he didn't give me like a yes or no answer because that answer was a no matter what. Because if he didn't say yes, then it was a no. And that doesn't really vary based on who I'm talking to because as, you know, a 15-year-old, people, especially adults, will take advantage of, I guess, my niceness and like my manners and my etiquette. And so if you allow them to do that by, you know, mincing your words to any extent, then they will like do everything they can to like undermine what you say and make it a less valid point. And so I've just like, you have to be extremely straightforward and there's no getting around, like you're making a point and that's what you're saying. So I don't think that changes in any circumstance. It's definitely gotten me in trouble before, like at school, but yeah, I think that's really important.
Yeah. I mean, she said it perfectly. I don't have anything to add, yeah.
My name's Elijah Joshua, and I live in Gresham, and I wasn't thinking about this at all at one point, and then someone introduced it to me, and I said, I'm curious. This Beyond Resistance sounds like something I would like to do the seminar, do this symposium for the next 3 days. I don't really want to go to the Southwest. I mean, that's nervous driving on my part because there's a lot of traffic. But after hearing you young people, I believe there's hope. You know what I'm saying? I'm 64 years old. I'm just proud of y'all and the work that y'all do, and I will support you every way that I can. And right now, I think y'all are amazing, and keep up the great work. And me and my family, we're gonna be leaving right about now.
Dramatic exit.
I have a question right here, going back to the topic on the youth and everything. And I'm not sure if you guys have experience with this, but like, what are some ways that you guys can, or like you can get the youth to kind of jump on board with this whole activism thing? Because like the coming up generations are definitely going to be like the biggest generations basically to have to deal with this. So I was just wondering on how like ways that you guys tackle this situation.
Mm-hmm. I'm not really completely sure on the question. Like, how are you asking? Like, how people can get involved?
Like the youth, basically, yeah. Like to get a young, because I see like 2 younger children here, so I was just wondering, like how, like to get more people involved with this, because that's definitely motivating to see, like younger kids here, definitely.
Yeah, so I mean, activism really has no age. Organizing has no age. You can do this at any age. Actually, one of the co-founders of our organization was literally 13 years old, a young woman named Haven Coleman, and she was incredible. And I mean, I think that you can tell your story, you can tell your perspective of it. Everyone has a different perspective that they can bring to the conversation. I think especially young people bring, even younger than us, bring such an important perspective that I think is missing from a lot of conversations. So I mean, you can get organizing, you can get active at any age, you can do local organizing, you can get on the national stage, but share your story, share your voice, and you can do way more than you ever think you could.
Hi. I just have a question regarding how do you relate to other types of activism that are a lot more radical, or I'm not going to say violent, but they have an approach that is a lot more confrontational than the one you have, especially knowing that you are such a role model for a lot of other young children that in the future are going to probably try to do their own activism. How do you relate to, without tone policing, the feelings of populations that are as valid as the type of activism you're doing?
So I think that it's clear, like throughout history, that direct actions and like confrontational actions have had their time and place, and they've had a significant effect on shaping, the history of the world. And an instrumental part of our organization is that, it's frontline youth of color, marginalized communities that are the core of this movement. And obviously, with direct action, with confrontational action, it puts us at risk for interactions with law enforcement. And for different youth that have different skin colors, those interactions are not always the same across the board. And so when I was talking about the friend of mine that got arrested, she was lucky that she was a white person, because if she hadn't been, the interaction could have been very, very different and much worse. And so it was scary for me, because if it had been me, it could have ended differently. If it had been someone else up there, it could have ended differently. And so my personal stance is often different than my organizational stance, because as an organization, I never want to put a youth at risk for a negative interaction with law enforcement, just because it's what the action is built around. I don't think that it's fair to ask a youth, especially a youth of color, to be in a position where they could have that type of interaction. And personally, while I do think that confrontational actions are important in, making change, I think it's already ridiculously unfair that we're asking youth to be the ones leading this movement. It's even more unfair to be asking youth to put themselves at risk for, being arrested or, even worse, being brutalized by the police, simply because we're the only ones brave enough to fight for what we're fighting for.
Yeah, and just piggybacking off of that a little bit, I think that we look back to so many movements, and I think one thing that's important that we've kind of really underestimated is the diversity of tactics and how important that is to a movement. And I mean, I don't think that there's necessarily any there's not necessarily superior tactics to another. I think that the best thing about a genuinely grassroots movement is that diversity of tactics will come out on its own, and we can respect that and support each other in our work. And especially in the 21st century, where we have all kinds of different, there's literally entire avenues of digital organizing that are opening up, and avenues where you can literally, sit at home and literally help start a movement and a genuine revolution. And so we look back to the civil rights movement, where there were so many different groups that did so many different types of actions. And I think that we need to replicate that today. And we're so lucky to have a genuine rainbow mosaic of people that can have that diversity of action. Whereas if you do have more of the privilege, or you do have more of the capability to do those more direct actions, you are able to do that. And I think that's something that's incredible and something that we need to really capitalize off of.
Hi, thank you. Do you think that social media is a useful tool for the movement, or do you find that there have been more effective ways to participate and contribute on an individual level?
I think that social media is an effective tool, but I also think we have to have a serious conversation about performative activism and about social media drawing the entire conversation the wrong way. I think that there's so many, people who get into the movement for the wrong reasons, and they get into the movement because they do see that there are people that are getting attention and they're getting clout off of it. And I think that does have a negative effect on pretty much every movement that is happening today. But I think that social media, when used right, is an effective tool. I think that a lot of my organizing work, I think about how we can mainstream the movement, how we can mainstream our values, our leftist values, and make people understand, everyday people who aren't climate activists or people who aren't environmentalists, understand why this should be important to them and why they should have the same value as us. And I think that social media is an incredible tool that we can use to do that.
Hi. This is a quote from University of Miami's Geological Science Department. I cannot envision southeastern Florida having many people in it by the end of the century. Miami, as we know it today, is doomed. It is not a question of if, it is a question of when. As a fellow Floridian, how do you face that? Are you leaving too?
Wait, sorry, am I what too?
Are you leaving? Like,
am I leaving Florida?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, but not because of climate change. That's yeah, I mean, it is a scary reality that we have to face. People all over the world are facing. But I mean, yeah, I guess. I mean, I don't really know how to answer the question. I guess, yeah, it is a reality that we face, and it is scary. And I think that it is really telling to see that actually Florida is a really hard place to organize people actually and get a lot of people out for climate justice. And I mean, I don't know if you do organizing or if you've seen that in your experience, because I mean, you're nodding right now, but like anyone who organizes in Florida can tell you that it's hard to mobilize people in Florida, which is the state that's going to be hit the most by climate change. It's hard to get them out to protest against climate justice, for climate justice. And I think that's just like a testament of how much work we have to do to mainstream the movement, like I was talking about just now, making people understand the issue. Even my own parents didn't completely understand the issue, and they're the people who have literally held their roofs down as hurricanes have gone over their houses back in the Caribbean. So I think that we have a lot of work to do in that realm as well, and making sure people understand what's really going on.
Hi, I wanted to thank you guys for coming out tonight. Also, I'm wondering, you're talking a lot about activism with within like government systems. I'm wondering how, like, what methods you use to hold elected and not elected officials accountable for moving quickly. I know activism with government officials, it's a lot of, well, we gotta wait, or my hands are tied, or I'm wondering how you make them move faster without compromising in a way that's debilitating or like takes away from your list of demands.
So like probably a lot of people here are familiar, but like youth, teens in general, kind of like post about everything that they go through at like every second of the day. Like we're always just like live streaming our thoughts like somewhere on social media. And so this is like genuinely really helpful when it comes to holding our elected officials accountable. Like last week we had a meeting with our Seattle mayor, and like during the meeting people were like tweeting and posting on their Instagram story like, oh my God, like our mayor's not listening to us, like she's ignoring us like right now. And it was like a picture of the mayor's face like sitting in front of them while they were posting it. And like she didn't know because she couldn't see our side of the screen, but it was like very genuine and very real that this is what we were going through right now. And people, were noticing like, are you in a meeting with her right now? Like, yeah, we're sitting here right now and she's literally not listening to anything we're saying. And like the trend has been that people that can vote are like listening to these interactions with the youth that are the ones like talking and having interactions with elected officials. And so like when I talked to our mayor, she actually like literally lied straight to my face. I said, have you signed your support for the Seattle Green New Deal? And she said, no, but I've released another like climate plan that it parallels the Seattle Green New Deal, but is like Seattle specific. And I looked everywhere online for this, like everywhere, and I could not find anything. Like the most recent climate plan I could find from her was from like 2017. And so I immediately tweeted out about this, and it, people were recognizing within my city that our mayor was lying to her constituents and was not being, and that was holding her accountable for what she was doing. And so when you talk about like holding people accountable from like a time perspective, like how quickly are you gonna do this, it doesn't really matter in the long run. Because if we say carbon neutral by 2025 or by 2030, like our mayor is gonna be, will be kicked out of office by the time her next term, her re-election comes back up, because Seattle is done with her. Like, she is not listened to anything we said. She's in the pockets of Amazon and other big companies. And the fact of the matter is that the constituents know what's going on. Like, we're not stupid. It's not just the youth. It's everyone realizing that if a politician is obviously not getting anything done, it's time for them to be gone. And so I think there's really minimal work that we need to do when it's so clear that a politician is not about what they're saying they're gonna do. Like, it's easy for us. Like, it doesn't even matter. Like, Elizabeth Warren called our mayor like liberal and progressive, and everyone in Seattle immediately was like, that's not facts. Like, that's not what's going on here. Like, everyone knows. It's a collective understanding. So I think holding her accountable is just a matter of like reminding people every time a politician does something that's not right, and eventually people just come to the understanding themselves.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to the earlier question about social media as a tool. When used correctly, how powerful it can be in organizing. Like, I don't know if you guys are familiar, for example, with Mike Gravel. Like, 3 teenagers literally started a presidential campaign and like almost made the debate stage entirely on social media. We look at, like, for example, Dianne Feinstein, almost completely similar situation to this, where she's telling these kids, oh, I don't like the Green New Deal, but I have my own, and she gets called out, and it's a viral video on social media, and her re-election chances are way diminished just because of that video and just because people calling her to account on social media. And so we have this unique ability, we have this unique access really to information, and I think that if we utilize that in the right ways, we can do so much in this movement.
I was wondering how focused you are on like campaign finance reform, because I know that's like a big problem in like the Seattle elections, for instance.
Yeah, so that's actually a big part of our focus right now. I talked about earlier how we're going through a restructuring. We're going to have a new policy platform that's going to have a huge focus on campaign finance reform. I'm sure you guys are familiar with the No Fossil Fuel Money Pledge, and we're completely down with that, and we're completely going to focus a lot of our organizing energy into making sure that is happening, because the biggest problem is the fact that the money is being funneled from the fossil fuel industry. These politicians, they don't want to run a campaign without that money, and they're not going to get that money if they're supporting actual policies that are going to help actual people. So campaign finance reform is at the top of the list.
We have one more hand here, and then I just wanted to check if anyone else has a burning question that they would like Feliquan and Kimaya to address before we... Okay, cool, good to know.
Hi, thank you for coming today. Both of you mentioned that building solidarity is something that is very important for both of you at a personal level and also at an organizational level. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more to that, what solidarity looks for you, what it means, and how you're building it with people who are doing activism here in the U.S., also people who are perhaps not organized yet, but like experience the struggles of climate justice, and also with activists abroad in other countries, especially in the global south, that maybe do not have the resources or the spaces or the acceptance or the big screen to do activism.
I missed the first part of the question. You said struggling with what? Sorry. Oh, solidarity.
Yeah, what solidarity means to you and how you build it.
Okay, yeah. Well, I think solidarity has a lot to do with just common struggles. So we see that, workers across the world, they're facing the same struggles. People, low-income people, the working class, we're all facing really similar struggles. And I think that being able to relate to people and being able to show everyone that this is our struggle together, and we can, if we collectively build our power together, if we band together, that we can stop a lot of this suffering, a lot of this struggle, that it's unnecessary. I think that that's one of the strongest tools that we have as a movement. And I think that all of the world people are really waking up to that fact. We look at, for example, Chile, what is happening right there right now, these huge protests, also largely led by youth, that are about class solidarity and about standing up to people, the government that is just completely, hollowing out the working class and hollowing out the middle class for absolutely no reason. I think that's our strongest tool as a movement. I think that we need to really move closer and closer to that part of the movement and that point of the movement. I think that's how we're going to win, and that's our tipping point, really.
And to add on to that, solidarity I think is really important as a concept, but it also manifests in relationships that you have with people. And one of my favorite things about being part of the climate movement is that I have met so many people all over the world that are passionate about the same thing and are organizing within where they live. I've met people in India and in Puerto Rico and all over the country and just in different countries everywhere that together we share what our experiences are in our countries, and we share our struggles, and we find a way to uplift each other from wherever we are. And that really just shows that obviously climate change is affecting the entire planet, and so we have to be united as one people of this entire earth. It's not about our separate countries and the separate governments, but it's about coming together and uniting as one humankind, I think.
So, thank you so much. Thank you for taking the time to speak with us. Thank you to all of you for being here, being engaged. I love how you ended on that note. And since we're on Chinook land right now, I would like to I would like for us to end by sharing with all of you a Chinook blessing that I think really powerfully echoes exactly what Kimaya just said. So bear with me here. We call upon those who have lived on this earth, our ancestors and our friends, who dreamed the best for future generations, and upon whose lives our lives are built. And with thanksgiving, we call upon them to teach us and show us the way. And lastly, we call upon all that we hold most sacred, the presence and power of the great spirit of truth and love, which flows through all the universe to be with us, to teach us, and show us the way. Thank you for being here.